Previously on Higurashi When They Cry console arcs.
どうやら捜査内容が漏れている疑いがあるのです。実際この半年間、私たちへの情報提供者の態度が直前あるいは直後に急変したりして、情報収集を阻害されることが何度かありました。
その証拠は
こちらです。聞き込みのアポを取った直後にこちらで準備した質問内容と実際の聞き込み時の供述、明らかに我々が必要とする情報を第三者が介在して口止めを図った形跡が見られます。
Tomoe spread out her police notebook and explained all the shorthand in her notes to Yamaoki. Officials were attempting to secretly approach people connected to Reina Ryuugu and Nagisa Ozaki, like the truck driver responsible for Nagisa's fatal accident, or hospital officials working at the facility where Yuko Hiranuma was suspected of killing a male student who was hospitalized there. In all cases, people questioned offered prepared answers like they already knew the contents of the questions, and they always say they don't remember, and with regards to the most important information. And on top of that,
平沼陽子の看護学校時代の親友だった女性、今行方不明なんです。
なるほどな。私や山村に黙っていたのも
味方を疑うのはあまり感心できることじゃありません。ただ今回の事件には異常な点が多すぎる。ただの男子学生と看護師が死んだ事件と片付けるには警察側への干渉力が現状ありすぎます。だから信用できる部下と一緒に調べてみたかったのです。
私は君にとってその信頼できる人間ではなかったということか。それは申し訳なかったな。
いえ、そうじゃなくて。
this was Yamaoki. If she had asked for his cooperation, he surely would have provided appropriate manpower and personal connections. However, if Yemi really was a police officer, that would be taking a big risk. The larger scale their activities, the easier they are to detect. The same was true for Yamamura, the section chief of the 1st Division, and for Dojima, section chief of the 1st Division at Prefectural Police. Due to those concerns, Tomoe was hesitant to tell them about it until now.
ですが、勝手な期待になって申し訳ありませんが、山沖さんたちならきっと何らかの形で気づかれると思っていました。そして残った時間はもうそれほどありません。多少強引でも敵の本質に近づく努力をし続けることで行き詰まっている現状を打破できるかもしれない。だから
そのためなら自らの命も危険にさらすと。
私も警察の端くれです。危険は覚悟の上で、敵が私を狙ってくれるのならなおのこと好都合です。それが捜査の突破口を開くことになり、そして私の後を引き継いだ誰かが犯人を捕まえてくれる。そのためのおとり役であれば喜んで引き受けるつもりです。
そして君は父と同じ末路に至る。親子二代、正義に準じて死す。救われん話だと思わんかね。いや、君はそれでも満足だろう。信じるままやりたいように生き、勝手にのたれ死ぬ。警察官としての信念を抱きながら思い残すことなく生きるだろう。だが残された家族、まどか君は。
それは
巴君。
ひょっとするとだからこそ父は自己満足を承知で一人だけの正義を貫いたのでしょうか。その結果として友人の思いに背き、家族さえも犠牲にした。一切のしがらみから自由に行動するため、 それが父なりの正義だった。だけど父のそんな思いは組織にとってただの独りよがりな愚かなものだったのでしょうか。
それは
前野さん、広報室長が以前話してくれたのです。あの人は新人の頃公安にいて、その指導教官が見ない警部補だったと。独自に行動することが多く、現場の人たちや上司はいつも振り回されていたそうですね。
ローエル事件を知っているか？
Why are you telling her this now?
はい。
Tomoe's eyes opened wide as she turned back and nodded, her hand still on the doorknob. For the longest time, Yamaoki would go quiet or dodge the question any time she broached the topic of her father. So she gave up trying, thinking the conversation would end like always. However,
長い話になるかもしれん。忙しくないとは思わないが、もう少し私に付き合ってもらえるかな。
Yamaoki's eyes urged her to come back as he said that. Tomoe forgot to even reply and quickly took a seat on the sofa, then desperately suppressed her rising palpitations as she turned toward Yamaoki and leaned forward. At the time, the major ruling party had overwhelming power in the House of Representatives, but was on the verge of splitting their majority due to a massive bribery scandal. And the distrust sown from that allowed a newcomer recommended by the opposition party to win the election. A single patient's death was the beginning of a scandal that shook the political world.
で、その異常行動だが、看護師や医師、それに周囲の患者に次々と襲いかかって強靭を振るう。と、幸い死者こそ出なかった。というのは建前で、実際には患者が2人、その傷が元で死亡している。報道すると社会的影響が大きいと判断されてな。一般の人々は他の精神疾患の患者たちに対して差別意識、あるいは排斥行動に出ないとも限らない。そして彼の体を司法解剖した際に脳から異常なほどのアドレナリン、興奮物質が発見されたのだ。
That was news to Tomoe, which meant that a strict gag order was put in place, even within the police force.
それを受けて、その患者に処方されていた治療薬が何か、厚生省と警察庁が主導となって調査が行われた。そしてその薬物を構成する成分配列を分析した結果、それは外資系の製薬会社によって提供されたものだと分かったのだよ。
その製薬会社がローウェル社ですね。
For any powerful weapon, as long as you know suitable countermeasures or the means to avoid it, it's less of a threat. No matter how overwhelming it may seem, there are ways to neutralize it. But once someone succumbs to fear, that can't be undone so easily. Fear is the mind killer. They become terrified of non-existent enemies and traps, or the shock of witnessing death can make one cling to life. Either way, soldiers obsessed by their fear completely lose their fighting spirit. So no matter their numbers, they're nothing more than a disorderly herd of cattle. Thus, maintaining the morale of soldiers is critical in times of war.
ならば、それを取り除いたとき、最強の兵士が生まれることになる。経験や性格的なものもあるだろうが、それが物理的に除去できるのであればより効率的だ。アルコールによる酩酊でもその近似の精神状態を作り出すことができるかもしれん。だが 他にもっと効果的な手段があるとしたら、それは何だと思う？
Medication.
抗精神薬ですか？
As soon as that thought came to mind, Tomoe gasped. She heard that drugs and alcohol were being openly used to raise morale during the war. Indeed, if fear can be eliminated, soldiers will literally give up their lives and rise up to confront any dangerous situation. In other words, he was saying the drug in question from the Lowell incident wasn't limited to treatment of mental illness, but actually developed for military use.
しかしユウスケ、君の父は何かを掴んだのだと私は考えている。そうでなければあんなあからさまな口封じをされるはずがないからな。
私をこの書き打ちに呼んでくださったのはそれも関係しているのですか？
For the longest time, anytime she asked that question, he'd dodge it. For a high-ranking member of public security like Yamaoki, accepting a chief position at a local precinct was like taking an early retirement. And despite being under completely different jurisdiction, Tomoe was somewhat forcibly dispatched from her position at the main office to the Kakuuchi location. She thought it could have been just a whim based on her prior connections, but the timing was far too perfect. And so, she wanted to know. She wanted to hear the real motivation, straight from Yamaoki's mouth. Yamaoki took 2 or 3 more smokes, remained quiet the whole time. Normally, the conversation would end right there. However...
そうだ。
1 month left. After that, Tomoe would be called back to the National Police Agency's Public Relations Office to start on another task. Her reckless project would probably end in failure. She assumed that she'd be forced to bear responsibility for the failure and demoted to a meaningless post. Nevertheless, they might acknowledge her success on other cases and put her back on the promotion track.
何なんだろう。
She couldn't be satisfied with that. There was no sense of accomplishment in being involved in a major farce. She wanted to catch the true culprit behind Kuhei and Nagisa's murders, and the death of Hiranuma. Though she knew it was reckless and unreasonable, that was her reason for coming back to Kakuichi. And after gaining allies and support completely incomparable to what she had last year, she seriously believed she'd be able to arrive at the truth. But, as grateful as she was for the support and expectations of her colleagues, on the contrary, it also made things increasingly frustrating when she found herself getting stuck like this. If she wanted to keep pursuing her personal justice, she had to keep moving forward in accordance with her beliefs. Accepting the reward and compensation alone, even if it only ended up hurting her. But, when delivering justice to someone, you have to think about the other party. Is it right to brush things off and stick to your beliefs? Or are you just doing it out of self-complacency?
とりあえずいい結果が出るといいですね。
And so it continues. Greetings, my name is Neosekken, and welcome back to my Let's Play of the Higurashi When They Cry console arcs. So, we're now stopping to use the facilities and maybe grab a snack on the way to our destination. But I am getting a bit of a bad feeling about this place. A sense of deja vu. And a very bad kind at that. Hopefully I'm just being paranoid, but if I'm not, then Tomoe, you might want to watch your back. Because we might have somebody dangerous here, waiting for us. It was Sunday today, so the area in front of the shop was crowded with families and couples. To escape the crowds, Tomoe headed to a vending machine off in a shady corner. She inserted a 100 yen coin and pressed the button for a can of coffee. As soon as she picked it up, she was surprised by how unexpectedly hot it was and accidentally dropped it.
あっちってホット
Tomoe cursed at the vending machine while gently picking it up with her fingers. Well, it was her mistake for pressing the button without checking first. But who sells hot drinks in the summer? Who sells ice cream in the winter? Doesn't stop some people from doing it.
空気読めよこんちきしょう
People read the air and they just don't care. It would be a waste to buy another, so she rolled it back and forth in the palm of her hand to cool it off. Tomoe let out a sigh, wondering if she should have just gotten some free cold water from the shop.
あれ
She suddenly turned toward the parking lot, feeling a strange sense that something was out of place. No, more like it was deja vu, so she quickly sharpened her vision. Okay, so it's not just me who's feeling a sense of deja vu then. She had visited the Kakushi service area many times in the past, but there was something different about the scene that stretched out in front of her. Sometime in the past, after finishing up an errand, she came here. That's right. She was sure of it. Honda had driven her here before. And... yeah, in one of the previous arcs, you ended up getting killed by an assailant who wanted those notes that you had about certain kinds of medication. That moment, Tomoe felt like she had been stabbed with a sharp instrument and gasped for her breath while holding her side. But there was nothing there. She wasn't wounded at all, and she couldn't see any traces of anything. Even when she examined her surroundings, all she could see were chatting customers.
気のせいよ
Tomoe shook her head to stave off the wretched hallucination. Then she pulled the tab on her can, which was finally starting to feel a little cold, and drank the coffee all at once. The sweet sugar and milk clung to her throat. She felt an unpleasant odor in her mouth. Was it because of the warm texture, or...
あれ
Just then, she casually glanced at the bus stop waiting area as she approached the trash can. But she suddenly came to a stop and focused her eyes. There were about 3 people under the awning waiting for the bus to arrive. And one among them was a familiar-looking girl. Oh, hello.
まさか
The side of her face was obscured by a beret-like hat and her shoulder-length hair. This was the girl she met in Hinamizawa half a year ago. Reina Ryuugu.
こんなところへなんで
Good question. I'd like to know that myself. Tomoe quickly hid herself in the shade and then assessed the situation. Today was Sunday. Students are off today, so it's not that unusual for them to go somewhere. But Rena appeared to be alone. It was suspicious that she didn't have any travel companions. For a girl her age, it would be strange to be traveling to a completely different prefecture without her parents, or at least some friends. That moment, she could see a highway bus pulling into the bus stop. Upon seeing all that, all the people in the waiting area rose to their feet, and Reina followed suit, lining up behind them.
どうするこのまま一緒にバスに乗って尾行するか
You might want to warn Hanada of that if you're going to do that. Don't want to abandon him and leave him wondering where the hell you went. That would be rude. Thinking that, Tomoe turned toward the parking lot by the bathroom, but unfortunately a long-haul truck was parked there, so she couldn't see anything beyond its huge frame. It would be convenient if Hanada was parked over there, But if he was still refueling at the gas station, it'd be a huge time sink to go let him know. Alternatively, she could get in Hanada's car and follow the bus from behind. But considering the road conditions, there was far too great a risk of losing sight of them when other cars merged in between. The bus would stop for a minute at most. She had no time to second guess herself.
そうだ。
Tomoe suddenly came up with an idea, then rushed to a nearby public phone and dialed the number for a Kakuchi Station Information Center.
はい、こちら下級所。
警部の見ないです。走行中の19号車の無線に連絡を。見ないは売店で参考人らしき人物を発見。それを追跡して高速バスに乗車。追って連絡すると。
了解しました。
よろしく。それじゃ。
Tomoe quickly said that and then hung up the receiver without waiting for a response. The information center should be able to contact Hanada over the radio in his car. And she should probably apologize to him after she gets back to Kakuchi Station. When she turned back toward the bus stop, the bus had just come to a halt and the automatic doors swung open, welcoming the passengers inside. Seeing that, Tomoe carefully approached the back of the line, making sure Rena wouldn't notice, and stepped up the ramp and boarded at the last moment.
どうしたのかな、みないさん。19号車ならみないさんと誰が乗ってるんだっけ？
The operator took a look at the dispatch table, then dubiously tilted her head. The name Minai was listed there, but the investigator supposedly accompanying her wasn't written there. Really?
こういうところすごくきっちりしている人なのにね。これ書いたのみないさん？いえ、違いますよ。確か男の人で、誰だっけ。とりあえず無線つなげばわかるかな。こちら下級地所情報センター。19号車応答せよ。
Oh. There was a bomb. Wait. Hanada, you're not a traitor, are you? Your name not showing up on that list. The car exploding the way it did. Who the hell can I even trust, honestly? The highway bus had departed to the Kakuji service area and was proceeding toward the city at a gradual pace. After exiting the highway and proceeding through a few town areas, they arrived at a bus terminal and then transferred to a downtown bus. However, Tomoe was in a hurry, so she neglected to confirm where the final stop was. Tomoe sat down in the far back seat and hid herself while listening in on the direction of the front seats. Rena was sitting close to the middle of the bus, with her back turned this way. It was hard to tell since her head was hanging low, but she probably wasn't aware that she was being followed. However,
どこへ行く気なんだろう。
after all, this is a long way to travel for a shopping trip. When Tomoe first spotted her, she wasn't carrying any bags other than a small purse. Of course, Reina had her own unique hobbies, like hunting for treasure at that mountain of garbage, so maybe it was normal for her to be doing things alone. But according to Tomoe's earlier investigation, based on what she heard from Uushi, she should be strongly opposed to leaving Hinamizawa. Given that, there must be a compelling reason for her to voluntarily travel outside the village. Yeah, I definitely agree.
そういえば。
Tomoe suddenly remembered the assault Reina Ryuugu committed back in Ibaraki, and gasped. She was a well-behaved girl with good relations with her friends, but underwent a sudden change and attacked them while rampaging through the school. Isn't that assault case just like what happened with Natsume the other day?
この薬を飲みすぎてから、なんだか自分じゃない自分が私に話しかけてくるようになって、私ほんのさっきまでその子に体を乗っ取られていたんです。その子、私の本当の心を暴き出してくるんです。みんな壊したい。みんななかったことにしたい。気に入らないこと全部消して、邪魔するやつはみんな殺して、そして。
Natsume didn't seem like the sort of child to lie to evade blame. And even if it's only halfway true, there's no doubt the drug had an impact on her mental state. And just like Natsume, Reina was from Hinamizawa. She even had medical exams at the Goguro University Hospital, so there's nothing mysterious about it. In which case, was there a chance she was prescribed the same medication as Natsume? Then, what if Natsume and Reina's anomalous behavior had the same root cause?
証拠はない。でも確かめる価値はある。
Eventually, the bus exited the highway and pulled onto the major city road as it entered Kakuji City. Then, an automated voice announced the next stop where the bus was heading. And at that moment... Tomoe's eyes opened wide in shock, and she barely managed to suppress her voice. Because the location of the terminal was...
ここって。
Tomoe was the last one to get off the bus, and she felt pain as she looked around the terminal in shock. The Omaki district of Kakuji City. She could never forget. This was a town where Nagisa lived. She paid a visit to her bereaved family after her death, but she couldn't even speak properly at the time. She could only clap her hands together praying for the soul of the departed. She must be here to visit Nagisa then. And she's tried visiting again a while later, but they had apparently moved. She was easily able to find out where they moved to, but it felt like the bereaved family, had given their reply to Tomoe and her cohorts. So she couldn't say anything more. Though this was a bus terminal, there was no major shopping center nearby. At best, there was a park surrounding a castle, but she likely didn't come here to see that. In which case, there was only one thing she could think of.
なんで今さら。
Rena should already know that Nagisa has passed away. Then why did she come here? Then did she come here to pray for her at her grave? But that conflicted the story she heard earlier. Hanada definitely met with Reina before, and he said, so he says. Now I'm starting to wonder about Hanada himself.
特になしです。無関係を装うというよりも無関心って感じでしたよ。
無関心。
せめてたたりにあって殺されたんでしょとか、いい気味だってな感じに反応してくれたら、こっちとしても名目が立ったんですかね。そうなんですかだけだったら返す言葉なしです。今時の子供ってのは転校したら前の友人のことなんて忘れちまうものなのかって正直呆れちゃいましたよ。
If that was how she acted when first informed her friend's death, what made her change her mind now? Was there something big that drove Reina Ryuugu to this decision? Or maybe...
こか。
I found the address plate posted on the corner and made sure the letters matched up exactly as I heard them. Then let out a sigh. This area was full of expensive homes that would be completely unimaginable in Hinamizawa. Even back when I was in Ibaraki, I hadn't seen many houses like these. The asphalt looked recently paved and had a nice smooth surface. And the neighborhood association must be doing a good job cleaning up, because there was no trash to be found anywhere. It was like a scene cut right out of television, like a completely different world. There was no scent of grass in the air, and the cry of the cicadas has a strange sound to it. No, I don't think this weirdness is this town's fault. It's just my heart making it feel that way. I carefully checked the address numbers one by one, and finally located the house. It was a beautiful 2-story house. It felt so excessive that it put extra weight and strain on my whole body. I couldn't find the nameplate. Still, the address written on the gate definitely matched what I had written on my notepad.
とうとう来ちゃった。
Looking at the place over once more, a shiver ran from my head to my toes. My knees had no strength left in them, and my legs felt like they were being crushed. A bloody odor erupted from the back of my throat. Tears were about to come spilling out if I relaxed even a little, so I blinked my eyes over and over while gritting my teeth. This is the house where Nagisa Ozaki-chan lived. I felt like turning back so many times before I got here. I didn't contact anyone beforehand. I'd be a bother if I just suddenly showed up unannounced. Just how many times did I make those excuses to myself and swallow them down? However, this is something I have to do for myself to set things right. I pressed the doorbell. They might not be home. Or maybe the bell is broken. I'm pretty sure it's not broken. Such a dishonorable means of escape came to mind. But before it could fully take shape, the front door swung open. And the person standing there was...
Huh?
He was an old woman I didn't recognize at all. And she must have felt the same way, because she was suspiciously looking back at me.
ここって尾崎さんの家ですか？
いいえ、うちは畠山なんですけど。
すみません。
Though I felt embarrassed, at the same time I also felt relieved. Come to think of it, there were plenty of times I ran into the same problem with houses in the city.
じゃあお隣は尾崎さんですか？
ええ、以前はそうだったわね。
だった？
引っ越しちゃったのよ。もう半年になるかしら。今は誰も住んでいないわよ。
As soon as I heard that, I gasped and froze. They moved? And it happened half a year ago? Half a year ago. That was when we spoke over the phone. Then Nagisa-chan isn't here anymore?
渚ちゃん、尾崎さんはどちらに引っ越されましたか？
さあ、ごめんなさい。急に出て行かれたから聞いていないの。
そんな。
I was stunned, and it felt like all the tension had finally snapped, so I collapsed to the ground with no strength left in me. Nagisa-chan had moved away. And could it be that Nagisa-chan moved away from here because she didn't want to see me? If only you knew. Then why? Why? Which way did I go, and how far did I walk from there? I couldn't remember. Before I realized it, I found myself sitting on a bench in the park. Streetlights faintly illuminated the ground, and I could see a cluster of beetles around it. I couldn't hear any human voices or any other signs of people. All I could hear was the rustling of the leaves in the wind. Maybe because it was nice and sunny in the daytime, the air right now felt sickeningly warm.
渚ちゃん
I spoke just that name, while spreading out the crumpled paper I'd been holding in my hand this whole time. I called all the middle school teachers and classmates I could think of, desperately pleading with them, and finally managed to get Nagisa-chan's phone number. My fingers were shaking, and I wasn't sure if I'd even be able to dial the number. But Nagisa-chan answered the phone, then immediately fell silent when she realized the person on the other end was me. I was so happy.
レイナなんでしょ？うん。本当にレイナなのね？うん。私、レイナだよ、渚ちゃん。
It had been so long since I'd heard my old name. I didn't want to be called that anymore, so I became Reina Ryuugu. The I in the name reminded me of icky, ugly old scars. But it had a nostalgic tone to it, hearing it from a voice I could never forget. So the depths of my chest started to heat up, and my eyes were getting moist. I felt like I was about to start sobbing. I could hear it. The sound of Nagisa-chan's heavy, painful breaths came in through the phone, shaking my eardrum. Until just a little while ago, she was a friend I could talk to about almost anything. It was crazy. We'd endlessly go on about all sorts of topics. Our parents got upset with us for taking so long on more than one occasion. And yet, right now, no words came to mind. I couldn't move my lips. Nagisa-chan kept quiet, waiting for me to say something. Even though she could easily hang up the phone, she was still listening, waiting for me to speak up. But what should I do? Is there anything I can say? Long time no see? I'm sorry? Or I was beginning to regret my hesitation and impatience, and thinking I should have stopped myself sooner, tears began spilling out. But just then,
Reina.
It was so calm. It was the meek, gentle voice of Nagisa-chan that I always loved, and softly resonated, filling my heart. Then,
会えないかな、どこかで。ごめんね。いろんなこといっぱいありすぎて、電話じゃうまく話せそうにないの。私、レイナと会って話がしたい。もう一度レイナの顔を見て話し合いたいの。渚ちゃん。レイナって今、ひなみ沢ってところにいるんだよね。私が住んでるのは大巻なの。知ってた？ここからだとバス一本で行けるところなんだよ。うん。
how does she know where I lived? That was a ridiculous question. I'm sure Nagisa-chan asked people about it and found out, just like I did. The tears I had been holding back finally came spilling out. Nagisa-chan had felt the same way I did. Even though I did such terrible things and hurt her, she was betrayed by her best friend, But she didn't forget me. She may be angry, she may hate me, and she might be resentful. But that was fine. I was happy with that. I tore myself apart and trampled on myself. The original Reina Ryuugu that I cast aside and threw away was the one Nagisa-chan always remembered.
ねえ、レイナ。ダメかな。私たち、もう、会えないのかな。そんなこと、ない。
In fact, the opposite. Was she really sure she wanted to see me again? I was confused with a mix of happiness and fear, so my mouth froze and I couldn't put my thoughts into words. I felt thankful. I felt frustrated, and hesitant, and restless, and bewildered, and like a nuisance. My inability to put into words was disappointing, sad, and shameful. However,
ありがとう、レイナ。
though I was being cowardly, Nagisa-chan spoke up first, and conveyed her kind-hearted feelings mixed with tears. And yet, I didn't even deserve to receive her thanks. Even if she held a grudge and blamed me as much as possible, she'd be in the right, and I'd be guilty enough to deserve it. And yet, Nagisa-chan, for my sake, all for me. The tears wouldn't stop. Why was I trying to forget my kind-hearted friend? Why couldn't I be more trusting? Why couldn't I open my heart and speak up? I was afraid of being hated. So whenever I thought I was being hated, I refused to accept that fact and ran away. But Nagisa-chan waited for me. For a vile coward like me, she defended my original place and even cherished it.
じゃあ、私、今度の日曜日にそっちへ行くから、待ち合わせ場所教えて。そんな、私がそっちへ行くよ。わざわざ渚ちゃんに来てもらうなんて。いいの。レイナも自分の知ってるところで会う方が安心してお話ができるでしょ。ね、お願い。そうさせて。渚ちゃん。
Maybe Nagisa-chan had heard about my family situation and my illness from someone, and that's why she was being so insistent. Just as she said that, I was really afraid to defy Orishiro-sama by leaving Hinamizawa. Even though the curse had passed, there was always a chance it could come back again. What's more, with Nagisa-chan pressing the attack that directly, there was no way to refuse. Thinking that, I suppressed the frustration clinging to my back and replied, yeah.
それじゃあまた。話したいこといっぱいあるけど、今度会った時に。ね。
Then, the two of us exchanged addresses just in case, and then ended the call. Even after the call was over, I held the phone to my chest and kept crying for a while longer. However, when the scheduled day arrived, Nagisa-chan didn't come. And after that, no matter how many times I called, nobody answered. I suddenly raised my head and took a look around. There were people around here and there just a little while ago, but I could no longer hear anyone. I'm pretty sure that Tomoe is hiding in a tree or a bush somewhere. The hands on my glow-in-the-dark watch told me the time. It was already late enough. I'd normally be in bed.
電車あるかな。
The highway leading to Hinamizawa is no longer in service at this hour. It might even be a last call for the train, too. A taxi might be the only remaining option, but if I were to call one this late at night, rather than give me a ride, they'd probably report me to the police. Just then,
こんばんは。
a voice called out from behind the trees, and I turned back. I saw a woman in a red suit walking toward me. I carefully peered at her, feeling suspicious, but since she was a woman, I didn't feel particularly scared. Still, it was natural to be cautious around strangers calling out to you at this time of day.
久しぶりね。半年ぶりかしら。
すみません。どなたですか？
見ない巴です。覚えてない？
すみません。
The woman's eyes were open wide, and she looked a bit surprised. Based on that reaction, could I have just forgotten her?
ごめんなさい。どこで会ったか教えてくれませんか？
ひなみ沢よ。それからこの柿内でもね。
レナ、この町に来たの今日が初めてなんですけど。
Her words were making me feel more and more suspicious. Even if she was just pretending to be an acquaintance, it's weird that she knows I'm from Hinamizawa. No way. Could she be?
警察庁広報室の警察官。いえ、こう言った方がよくわかるかもね。元茨城県警の刑事です。
Suddenly, a skin-crawling chill ran down the nape of my neck. Before I realized it, my feet were trembling, and a cold sweat was running down my forehead and along my cheeks. A detective? Why? What did she want from me? Your soul! In this dark corner of the park, draped in only the curtain of light coming from the streetlights, Tomoe suddenly adjusted her posture to look face to face with Reina Ryuugu. The girl stood up from the bench, with an expression so distraught it was plain to see even in the dark, and looked at Tomoe with her jaw clenched tight.
茨城県警の刑事さん。
ええ、そう。電話ボックスで会った時、あなたに明かさなかったかしら。
何のことかわかりません。レナ、あなたとは一度も会ったことないです。
ふん。
Looking at Reina's face, Tomoe snorted and shrugged her shoulders. To hear her so completely deny it after leaving such a strong impression, it wasn't just brazen, it was aggravating. What's more, the fact that she could remain so calm while lying was far beyond her years, and not like an innocent child at all.
なかったことにする気か。まあいい。それならすぐにボロが出る。
Tomoe set aside the discomfort in her heart and carefully focused on Reina's mannerisms as she stood there quietly. She was too slow to react last year, but now that she knew her opponent was capable of behaving aggressively, she had no intention of repeating the same mistake. For that reason, she was willing to set aside her dignity as a police officer and pin her down if things got a little rough.
じゃあ、そういうことにして。と言っても、私の方は全くの見ず知らずじゃない。あなたを取り調べた少年係の担当は 私の友人でね。いろいろ。
Rena grabbed the ribbon on her chest and squeezed it hard enough to let out an audible squeak, while cautiously gazing at Tomoe. Seeing that, Tomoe casually relaxed the left side of her jacket, ready to immediately pull the extendable baton from her inner pocket depending on Reina's reaction.
この間合いなら抜き打ちでもやられたりはしない。
Plus, even if she tried to flee, Tomoe could apprehend her on the grounds of trying to guide a girl loitering around outside in the middle of the night, and justify her actions that way. Tomoe remained on full alert and wouldn't let her advantageous position go to waste.
何のご用ですか？
その言葉、そっくりあなたにお返しするわ。ひなみ沢に住んでいるあなたが何の用があってこの書き打ちに。
Rena turned back with a sharp glare, while suddenly catching her breath and solidifying herself. That stern reaction was far different from how schoolchildren are raised to react. It was far more intimidating in words, enough to make you forget you were dealing with another girl.
どうしたの？それとも私が先にあなたの質問に答えたらあなたも答えてくれるのかしら？
レナはただ友達に会いに来ただけです。その帰りにこの公園に寄って。
なるほど。茨城時代の友達。尾崎渚さんにかしら。
Now completely understanding everything, huge globs of sweat began pouring out of Reina's entire body all at once. This detective named Minai wasn't simply asking questions. She was verifying the information she already knew.
尾行されていた。どこから？
She went from Hinamizawa to Okinomiya and took the bus to Kakuichi. She was thinking about Nagisa the whole time, so she never noticed she was being followed. What's more, based on her responses, it was clear she'd been following her well before she came to the park. But why on earth would someone follow her? Even though she only left Hinamizawa to meet up with Nagisa, why would someone be keeping watch on her of her like this? Against that completely illogical absurdity, confusion and hesitation ran rampant. And from that thought, animosity and distrust toward this detective rose up in Reina's chest. Just what on earth was this detective questioning her about?
尾崎さんに何の用だったの？
別にそんなの刑事さんに関係ないじゃないですか。もう夜も遅いので帰ってもいいですか？
待ちなさい。
After trying to leave, Tomoe quickly grabbed Reina by the arm to stop her. Reina instinctively tried to shake it off, but moaned while turning to her with a look of agony on her face. Her wrist joint was lightly bent inwards. If she showed any signs of resistance, she could be easily suppressed in a single blow.
この人本気だ。
A horrifying fright rose up inside her, but Reina suppressed it and finally said, "Please let go," in a trembling voice. However, Tomoe maintained her stern expression and continued speaking.
未成年の深夜徘徊に対しては警察官の任意判断で補導を執行する権利が認められている。今の時間、そしてこの町の慣習から考慮しても余裕である。
え？
それと一応言っておくけど、ここで逆らえば公務執行妨害もプラスされる。おとなしく言う通りにした方があなたのためよ。
The light in Reina's eyes was shaking violently in fear. When Tomoe was able to see that in the dim light, she suddenly frowned in discomfort. When she made that sort of proclamation with young people in the past, there were two main types of reactions. The first is to become hostile, to show intense emotions like a beast baring its fangs. This is the general attitude one shows when they realize they're in an inferior position, and the fear and anxiety visible in the back of their eyes is clear proof of that. And the second is to become entirely expressionless, as if completely frozen, but also completely observant of the movements around you, waiting for a chance to act without hesitation. The latter of which is far more cunning and harder to deal with. They lose perception of evil in their own situation, and they even abandon any feelings of guilt, so that they're at an elevated risk of violently running wild. Even now, Tomoe still suspected that Reina Ryuugu had some involvement in Nagisa Ozaki and Kuhei Suramura's incidents. Of course, she didn't think Reina was the culprit, but she felt that there was somebody working behind her, whether it was the Sonzaki family, like Ushi says, or some sort of medical personnel, or something else. It's possible those people were acting behind the scenes, even when she entered this park, and were planning to make contact with her. She couldn't help but speculate. Thus, in her point of view, Reina Ryuugu should have something to show in this provocation, and there'd be no point in arguing over it, so she intended to secure it. But even in this darkness, the dim light from the streetlights revealed fear and anxiety on Reina's face. Moreover, she could detect any of the violent murderous intent she witnessed before, which left Tomoe baffled.
この子、本当にあの竜宮レイナなの?
Tomoe squinted her eyes while dubiously looking at Reina. She expected total resistance, but this was completely different from the image of her from Tomoe's memories. She gently stroked her neck with her still bandaged hand. Tomoe definitely was assaulted by her and strangled at the phone booth in Hinamizawa half a year ago.
死ねえ、おバカさん。
Though she was surprised, at the time she was truly prepared for death. In her rapidly fading consciousness, the girl's visage was so frightening and cruel. She looked like a man-eating monster with the blood of demons flowing through her, just as Ushi said. And after that, on the night she went out to eat with her little sister, Monica, she saw Reina at the scene when their car exploded. Tomoe still had some lingering doubts about how she'd be able to cause a car to explode, but since she was there, it was hard to say she was irrelevant. And yet, the Reina Ryuugu standing in front of her was a completely ordinary girl.
一体どっちが本当の竜宮レイナなんだろうか?
Tomoe remained alert to her surroundings while keeping her eyes fixed on Reina. She couldn't see any other people nearby or sense any signs of anyone else approaching. In the worst-case scenario, she was prepared to be attacked by the girl's contact person when she first called out to her, but she was now starting to feel that was pointless.
とにかく一度署に来てもらえるかしら。あなたの親御さんにも連絡しないとね。
どうしてですか？レナ何も悪いことなんてしていません。親にもちゃんと言ってきたし、もう家に帰るつもりでした。不良みたいに決めつけないでください。
決めつけか。でもあなたにその心当たりがないとは言わせない。前科ありってのはね、子供大人に関係なくそういうものなのよ。こういう場合、普通の子なら注意で済むわ。でもあなたの過去を知った警察官ならほぼ間違いなく調書を取る。そうなれば親だけでなく今の学校にも連絡が行くのよ。自分の軽率を理解しなさい。
Though she realized it was a harsh thing to say, Tomoe shook it off and dared to say it anyway. If she was actually up to no good, she should be repulsed here and begin acting violently. That way, her passion would give a glimpse of her real intentions regardless of how she tried to portray herself. But what if that wasn't the case? Perhaps she was doing the most heinous thing a former youth division officer could ever do. In that way, her suspicion turned into self-questioning and in self-loathing. But just then...
え？どうして警察の人はレナのことそんな風に悪く言い続けるんですか？これでもレナは、私はいっぱい反省して後悔して生まれ変わろうとやり直そうと思っているんです。前に壊した幸せは取り戻すことなんてできないけど、だったら違う幸せを見つけよう。そして今度こそ大事にしていこうと一生懸命に頑張っているつもりなんです。なのに、どうして警察の人はそれを分かってくれないんですか？
それは。
それとも、まだ足りないんですか？反省して罪を償っているように見てもらえないんですか？だったら私はどんな罰を受ければ納得してもらえるんですか？それとも、私にはもう幸せになる権利なんてないんですか？
Reina's accusations had Tomoe at a loss for words. There was no longer any anger or aggression in her voice. In fact, all that remained was the sound of one being torn apart by grief. Regret for her sins, sorrow for her past, and a sense of loss.
分かっています。私が傷つけた友達、迷惑をかけてしまった人たちはもっともっと苦しんで、自分でめちゃめちゃにしておいて知らん顔で逃げてきてしまったことは卑怯で恥知らずな最低の行為だって。今さら謝ってももう遅い。誰も許してくれない。そして何かあったら真っ先に疑われる。どんなに言い訳しても簡単には信じてもらえない。
竜宮さん。
でもだったら私はどうすればいいんですか？私が壊したガラスのように粉々になればいいんですか？私がひどいことをした友達と同じ傷を負えば納得してもらえるんですか？それならなんでそうしてくれなかったんですか？私これでも犯した罪と同じ罰を受けるつもりでいたのに。なんで
Reina's voice was gradually getting lower, heavier, and more murky. Her eyes had previously been staring intently at Tomoe, but now they were gazing downward. And then, when the sniffling soreness in her throat reached her ears, she looked up, with tears overflowing from her dark eyes. As soon as Tomoe released her hand, Reina collapsed on the spot, sobbing with her hands over her face. Looking down at her like that, Tomoe felt intense regret and reproach after realizing she had made such a ridiculous misunderstanding all this time. She thought the girl who attacked her was lacking in human heart. She thought of her as the girl who tried to bomb her car, so she couldn't view her appropriately as a girl of her age.
でも、そうじゃない。そうじゃ
Reina
なかったんだ。
Reina Ryuugu, a girl still suffering from her past. Always thinking of the sins she committed, the irreversible mistakes she made, and constantly feeling a sense of guilt over the fact that she never received the punishment she deserved. Based on what Uchi said, she had a bright, cheerful demeanor when she was spending time with her classmates. But on the other hand, she also had very unusual hobbies. At first glance, those two notions seemed completely contradictory, but tracing them back, they both originate from the same general ideas. Repenting for her past, focusing on the present, and anxiety about the future.
竜宮さん
If you're unable to bear the pain and suffering of your wounds, is it cowardly to look away? Is it unfair? Tomoe had no right to say one way or the other. If that's the case, then...
あの子が憎いとか悔しいって気持ちはすごくあるけど、でもやっぱりあの子のことを信じてあげたい。そして今度こそ私は自分にできることをしたい。言い合ってぶつけ合って最後はあの子を許してあげたい。それが私の本心です。
ごめんなさい。カッとなってひどいことを言い過ぎた。あなたはもう十分に罰を受けたのに、それに追い打ちをかけるようなことをしてしまった。本当にごめんなさい。
After saying that, Tomoe released all her tension, then walked over to Reina and knelt down to gently hand her a handkerchief. She just stared at it for a while, but eventually she quietly grabbed it and wiped away her non-stop overflowing tears.
尾崎渚さんに会いに来たのね。
はい。
Reina's head was turned down and she was choking back sobs as she lightly nodded to Tomoe. Seeing her up close, her body looked very innocent and delicate. There was no trace of the criminal from the assault incident who sent several students to the hospital. She was a completely ordinary girl.
この一連の反応、演技とはとても思えない。
Of course, there was a non-zero chance that this was all camouflage, and that her real intentions were far darker. Nevertheless, Tomoe couldn't imagine that a girl exuding such heartfelt sentiment could be so shrewd. No, maybe she didn't want to think so. Because if she doubted even that, she wouldn't be able to believe in anything in the future.
渚さんとはちょっとした知り合いでね。あなたに会いたがっていたわ。とっても。相談に乗ったこともあるの。あなたから電話をもらったこと、すごく喜んでいた。
渚ちゃんが。
Reina pulled up the soaked handkerchief away from her eyes and stared at Tomoe, who was gazing at her with a far gentler expression than before. She was able to set aside her caution because Tomoe was sincere enough to kneel down on the soil to match eye level with her, showing no concern over getting dirty in the process. And also because...
渚ちゃんはこの人のことを。
The Nagisa that Reina knew was very cheerful but also very shy. No matter the age of the person she was speaking to, she wasn't one to casually reveal secrets like that. So, if Nagisa told her about the phone call from Reina, she must have really trusted her.
だからね、私はあなたに対して彼女以上に怒りを感じていたんだと思う。こんなに優しくて友達思いの渚さんと一方的に関係を絶っていなくなってしまうなんてひどい子だって、あなたのことをよく知りもせずに勝手にそう思っていた。そのせいで最初からマイナスの印象を持ってあなたに話しかけてしまった。ごめんなさい。
刑事さん。
Upon seeing Tomoe plainly and sincerely bow her head in front of her, Reina stopped crying and began to calm herself. She felt like she could understand why Nagisa thought so highly of this detective.
謝りたかった。
え？
Then, opening her heart, Rena spat out the words that she'd been holding in all this time.
本当はすごく謝りたかったんです。ひどいことをして渚ちゃんのこといっぱい傷つけて、あの子の大好きだった男の子をバットで何度も殴って大怪我させて、学校内で暴れ回ってあの子が泣いて止めるのにいっぱいガラスとか壁とか壊してめちゃめちゃにして。
Even now, she sometimes saw it in her dreams. She shattered window glass covered the linoleum floor of the hallway. Her whole body was covered in scratches. She walked around with a vacant look in her eyes, and her uniform dyed in blood. She couldn't remember where she found it, but she was holding a metal bat. Reina held it in one hand, dragging it along the ground, letting out a dry, rattling sound as she went. The classmates around her all watched the terrified looks in their eyes, unable to even approach her. The adults didn't know what to do. Not even the physically strong PE teacher or the annoyingly cautious older teacher. They just tried to maintain their dignity by protecting students from her violence. Rena gazed at that pathetic sight and sneered, then let out a high-pitched laugh to scoff at them. A cruel, distorted look floated to the edge of her mouth, like she was toying with them. It was horrifying. As she continued her violent assault, she kept on cackling without showing any hesitation or kindness, like some kind of monster. Her head felt pain like it was being split open, so bad that intense vomit came rising up from the back of her throat. And what's more, that face truly was hers. Even though her hair was a mess and she was caked in blood and mud, those eyes, that nose, and that mouth were just looking in a mirror. No, that's not it. That was undoubtedly her former self. It left an ugly mark like a nail hammered into her memory. Reina herself was the thing she most hated in the world, and most wanted to forget.
なんであんなことをしてしまったのか自分でもわからない。本当に何もわからないの。でもとんでもないことをしたとはっきり理解して、それからいっぱい後悔したけど、もう全然取り返しがつかなくなっていて、誰に謝ればいいのか、どれだけ謝ればいいのか考えているうちに、もう絶対誰にも許してもらえないんだと分かったら、それで
竜宮さん、
本当は謝りたかった。迷惑をかけた人たちにすぐにでも会って、心の底からいっぱい謝りたかった。でも大好きな友達にひどいこと言われて、あんたなんか死んじゃえって言われると思ったら、私嫌われるのが、罵られるのが怖くて、だから
わかるわ。その気持ちわかりたいと思う。仲の良かった友達に嫌われるのって本当に辛いことだしね。
Tomoe gently laid her hand on Reina's dirty, tear-stained hands. An endlessly spilling stream of tears dripped from above, conveying the depth of her sorrow. How could such an innocent girl have resorted to that level of violence? The confusion and doubt still smoldered in her heart like a small fire. However, in that case, she had to prove these tears were genuine. Thinking that, Tomoe raised her head and called out, "Ryuugu-san."
行きましょう、会いに。 連れて行ってあげるわ。渚さんのところへ。
Oh dear. Tossing around in her sleep, Reina suddenly noticed something beside her and opened her eyes. She could vaguely recognize the backs of 2 chairs lined up, and she didn't hear the sound of birds, but the hum of an engine and the sound of flowing wind.
よく眠れた？
Reina jumped up, tossing aside the blanket that had been covering her body. Even though it was pitch black outside when she dozed off, looking out the windshield past the passenger seat, she could see the sun shining bright as it rose beyond the ridgeline of the mountains.
私、寝ていましたか？
ええ、ぐっすりと。疲れていたのね。まだ着くまで時間があるから、もう少し寝ていてもいいわよ。
いえ、もういいです。すみません。
Reina neatly folded the rumpled blanket and set it aside, then took a seat. Really, she was still feeling sleepy, but she just couldn't relax.
ずっと運転されてたんですか？
まさか、一度ちょっと休んだわよ。サービスエリアによって10分ほど寝て、その毛布かけてあげたの。覚えてない？
すみません。
Rena apologetically shrugged her shoulders, but at the same time she seemed uncomfortable. It's true that she was worried about her family and about Nagisa, and that she hadn't gotten a good night's rest in a while, but she had never ever slept that deeply in the back of the seat of a stranger's car. Not to mention, she was shown this kindness from a police officer. It was like she was riding in the car of an enemy. Even though it was a relief to learn that she knew Nagisa, for a while after waking up it still felt like a dream.
ひょっとして。
Suddenly, Reina had a thought. This detective named Minai knew about her past, so she wondered if she was prepared to reopen it. When she came to Hinamizawa, no matter how much fun she was having with her close friends, somewhere in her heart she had the illusion it was all an act. That when she decided to forget her past and started calling herself Reina Ryuugu, someone who likes cute things, who is kind to everyone and tries her very best at everything. That was the sort of ideal girl Reina always strived to be. Thanks to that, she was fortunate enough to gain new friends, and not just people who were fun to play with, but allies who were willing to help her when she's in trouble. Just the other day, they were kind enough to help her before the situation would have become rough at home.
今の私は幸せだと思う。
She must be referring to the pink-haired bimbo and her scheme having been foiled.
それはよくわかっている。
But on the other hand, she's hated the source of all her problems, the existence known as Reina Ryuugu. And for that reason, she decided that all proof of over a decade she lived under the old name should disappear. And she was afraid of her new friends learning about her time in Ibaraki. So she started subconsciously developing resistance to letting her true feelings show to them.
でもそれじゃいけないんだ。それをみんなが教えてくれた。
Keiichi, Rika, and Mion, they were all worried about her holding everything in. And Sadako suddenly asked if she could have a sleepover just before the incident, probably because she knew something was wrong. Plus, Keiichi and the others only learned about the situation with Rina and Mamiya because Shion told them in the first place. Well, I'm now starting to see why this arc and the other Miyatsukushi arc were originally one piece. and how it could be potentially confusing to have them split up like they are in this particular version of the console arcs. This is kind of a crucial scene. Well, everything's been happening in this episode, I mean. She placed a hand on her chest and took a light breath. That's right. She had to mark the end of her old self. It's not about forgetting it or throwing it away. She had to face it steadfastly, take it, and digest it into her current self.
だから私は渚ちゃんに会う。
No matter what terrible things she may say, even if she scolded her and vented her rage at her, she didn't mind. No matter how hard or painful it may be, if I don't start there, I won't be able to move forward. You are really not going to like what Tomoe is about to show you then. At all. With that determination lingering in the bottom of her heart, Reina raised her head and looked forward.
ごめんなさいね。学校まで休ませて遠くに連れ出して。先生には伝えなくて大丈夫？
はい。みーちゃん。いえ、友達がうまく伝えてくれるって。父にもその子の家でお泊まりして学校に行くって話しましたから。
そう。
Gently gazing at Reina through the rearview mirror, Tomoe's thoughts were somewhere else. The Mii-chan she referred to was probably her best friend, Mion Sonozaki, the acting head of the Sonozaki family and leader of the three families. But thanks to that, Tomoe had another concern. Being able to invent facts about a student's absence meant that she could easily manufacture proof of someone's disappearance. In fact, she heard from Uushi. A boy went missing a few days after watching Higurashi last year, Satoshi, and he suspected it was a plot orchestrated by the Sonozaki family. In which case, wouldn't the fact that Reina is spending time with a police officer potentially create unnecessary misunderstandings that could endanger her?
考えすぎかな。
Reina used a payphone to contact her friend Mion, and Tomoe was listening beside her, but she didn't say anything about the police, and they didn't seem to be speaking in code words. The person on the other end of the phone simply spoke to Reina like an old friend, and probably understood that she was doing well and just needed some time off school.
むしろ花田くんと連絡が取れなかったのが手落ちだったかな。
Probably because Hanada-kun is a traitor! Unfortunately, the information center was busy, so all she could do was leave a message telling him to contact her. Nevertheless, it's a little tough not hearing anything from the other side. She was at least able to carry a pager of her back when she worked at Kakuichi Station.
何？
どこへ連れて行ってくれるんですか？もうすぐ東京だって。
Yeah, thinking about it now, it's honestly a good thing that you and Reina ended up running into each other where you did, because going by the car that you were traveling in at the time exploding the way it did, with Hanada, God knows where, Reina may have just ended up saving your life, Tomoe. Just as Reina said, the sign they drove past showed the distance to Tokyo. It was early morning on a weekday, so there wasn't much traffic. They'd be able to reach their destination in just a few hours.
言った通り、渚さんのところよ。電車だとちょっと行きにくい場所にあるからね。
平日に押しかけて迷惑じゃないでしょうか。渚ちゃんにも都合があるだろうし、それに学校だって。
大丈夫よ。あなたのことずっと待ってくれているから。ずっとね。
I'm really not gonna like this.
Huh?
Eventually, after passing through several toll gates, Tomoe's car turned off the expressway and onto a national highway. Then, they proceeded lightly down a few roads with minimal traffic, and the scenery gradually transformed from an unfamiliar city to a desolate small-town landscape. The number of traffic lights was gradually decreasing. The tall buildings were gone, and there were sometimes even wide fields spread around. In a sense, the scenery conveyed a peaceful atmosphere. But for some reason, Rena couldn't help but feel a lingering unease. And then...
着いたわ。
Here we go. Tomoe pulled her car into a small parking lot and came to a stop in a very quiet rural area with few residential buildings nearby. After looking at the sign by the entrance, Reina realized the worst scenario she imagined while on the way here was the truth. She began trembling. While grabbing the headrest of the front passenger seat and leaning out from the back seat, Rena's whole body was quivering so intensely she couldn't take a single step, because the sign right before her eyes read, Musashigawa Memorial Park. The name made it clear this was a cemetery. Seeing her eyes open wide and her face turn pale, Tomoe was convinced. This girl knew nothing about the current Nagisa. She hadn't heard anything about it. Curious how Hanada would neglect to mention something that crucial to when he went to go speak with Reina, allegedly.
特になしです。無関係を装うというよりも無関心って感じでしたよ。
Hanada, you're becoming more and more suspicious by the minute. Despite his words echoing inside Tomoe's head, the situation actually proved the opposite. But now she had an obligation to fulfill, which was more important than that.
さあ、竜宮さん、行きましょう。辛いかもしれないけど、しっかりして。彼女もきっとあなたのことを待っていると思うから。ここよ。
Right before her eyes was a fairly new tombstone. Here lies the Ozaki family. And the black letters engraved on the tablet stone beside it hadn't yet been faded by weathering, so they were easy to read.
そうだ。え？
Reina had been frozen in place, but then, like flipping a switch, she rushed to the side of the grave and shouted so loud it sounded like blood was spewing from her throat. And then she clung to the tombstone and rubbed her forehead against it while crying. Reina raised her wet, crying face to once again look at the tablet, and was surprised when she suddenly saw the date. Nagisa Ozaki died October 14th, 1982. That day was the same day she promised to meet Nagisa. Finally realizing why she never came to Okinomiya, Reina clawed at her hair and wailed.
そんな嫌だ
My heart is genuinely breaking right now.
リュウグウさん、
なんで渚ちゃんがどうして渚ちゃんがこんなことに教えてください刑事さん病気ですか事故ですかそれともまさか
Clinging to Tomoe's hand on her shoulder for comfort, Rena squeezed her voice to ask that in a forceful tone. If she said it was murder, this girl would begin frantically hunting the killer, intending to personally kill them. So,
事故よ。帰宅途中で車にひかれてね。
Tomoe herself didn't believe that, but she had no choice but to answer that way. And Reina's reaction was unequivocal proof that she wasn't involved in Nagisa's incident. Reina slumped down on the spot and leaned toward the gravestone beside her with a dejected look on her face, reaching out to the tablet with no regard for her skirt getting dirty. Just to touch it. Several difficult kanji were spelled out there, detailing a posthumous name, but she didn't understand the meaning of any of it. She didn't want to. But, as she came to realize that those characters represented the name of her dear friend, the sadness and despair in her chest grew to crushing levels. And even more tears came overflowing. Reina muttered that in a faint voice that seemed like it was about to fade away. The person to whom she wished to convey those words was no longer in this world.
ずっといつか謝ろうって思ってた。ひどいことしてごめんなさい。ひどいこと言って黙っていたくなって。それにあの後何も話せなくて。それから勇気出していっぱい勇気出して電話して出てくれた時、お話ししてくれた時、会ってもいいって言ってくれて、もう一度会ったらどんなことを言われてもいい、どんなことされても、たとえ殺されたって、そう思ってそう覚悟してでも私は渚ちゃんに会いたかった。なのに
My heart is still breaking. It hurts. The day when they were scheduled to meet one another. Reina kept waiting for a long, long time. Time passed all the way into the evening. Even after dark, after the train stopped running, she kept on waiting. Maybe she got the date wrong, so she thought about waiting until the next day. But in the end, Nagisa never came. Reina felt crushed by the weight of her sins and cried. She left Okinomiya Station and kept on walking and walking, a distance that would take hours by bus, crying all the way. Please stop. My poor heart. For the next few days, she was bedridden with a fever. When the fever receded, she finally regained a little strength. Reina thought it was over. This must have been her punishment. Thinking that, she decided this pain was a cross she'd have to bear for the rest of her life. However, her true punishment wasn't that. What she thought of all this time as a harsh punishment actually seemed easy compared to this cruelty.
竜宮さん、
刑事さん、私はどうしたらいいんですか？
え？
私はもう許してもらえないんですか？どうやったら私、この罪を償うことができるんですか？
それは
死刑になればいいんですか？みんなにしてしまったことと同じ報いをこの体に受ければいいんですか？犯罪者はいつまでも何をやってもずっと犯罪者なんですか？私もうわからない。どうしたらいいのか、何をすればいいのか、もうわからない。
In response to Reina's heartbroken question, Tomoe can only turn her head down and bite her lip. It's perfectly natural to punish people for their transgressions, but if there's nobody there to offer them forgiveness, the criminal will be forced to suffer the rest of their life with the weight of their sins on their conscience. Of course, that can be seen as their true punishment. And in Reina Ryuugu's case, the opportunity to obtain forgiveness has already been lost forever. There is no greater punishment. And if so, will she have to continue her entire life without ever being forgiven?
そんなことはない。
Tomoe shook her head. As a police officer, she wasn't delivering revenge. She had a different, more important duty to fulfill beyond apprehending criminals. And that was...
竜宮さん、これを読んで。
After saying that, Tomoe pulled a single envelope from her jacket pocket and held it out to Reina. It's Nagisa's letter. The address had her name on it, and the sender was Nagisa.
これは
渚さんが最後に私にくれた手紙よ。あなたにだけは読んでもらいたいの。
渚ちゃんが。
She pulled a bundle of notepaper out from the envelope and spread it out before Reina. The writing on the page was nostalgic and could easily be recognized as Nagisa's handiwork. Reina once again raised her head to look up at Tomoe. Then, after receiving a nod of affirmation, she dropped her eyes back to the paper and started reading.
背景、見ない刑事様。先日はいろいろと私のためにご尽力いただきまして、本当にありがとうございました。あの後何度かお電話を差し上げたのですが、タイミングが悪く、その都度外出中とのことでしたので、お手紙をお送りすることにしました。実は、ご報告があります。先日レイナと電話にて話をすることができました。それも信じられないことに、私からかけたわけじゃありません。レイナからかかってきたんです。でも、私にはあまりにも突然すぎて、それに、レイナもなんだかぎこちない感じで、お互いに何から話していいのかわからず、結局、あまり会話できなかったのが残念でしたが、それでも一度会って、お互いにゆっくり話をしようということになりました。なぜ、あんな事件を起こしてしまったのか。なぜ、何も言わずに黙っていなくなってしまったのか。そして今、 お互いどんな思いを抱えて暮らしているのか、そのことを会った時に思い切ってぶつけてみようと考えています。もちろんそのことで私もレイナも過去の傷をさらに深めてしまうかもしれない。そしてひょっとしたらやっぱり会わなければよかったと後悔するかもしれないという不安は今でもあります。でも私はやっぱりレイナと話をすることから始めたいんです。食材とか懺悔とかそんなものはもういらない。何もかも打ち明けて話してぶつけ合って、それでもレイナが私の友達でいてくれるかを私はあの子に尋ねたい。そして私も今度こそ本当の意味であの子の友達になれるかを確かめたい。だって私は今でもレイナのことが大好きだから。レイナのせいで悲しいことも味わったけど、彼女との楽しい思い出も間違いなくたくさんあるんです。その思いを私はあの子に伝えたい。そしてあの子が表に出せなかった悩みや苦しみを受け止めてあげたい。あの子が昔私にそうしてくれたように。会った時あの子は笑ってくれるかな。話す時の癖はまだ残っているかな。いろんな不安だらけだけど、でもそれと同じくらい期待もあります。だから私は信じてレイナと会ってきます。そして刑事さんにいい報告ができるよう頑張っていきたいと思っています。結果は後日お電話にてご報告します。もしお忙しくてまた連絡が行き違うようでしたら、自宅の電話番号を書いておきましたので、お手すきの時にでもお電話をいただけましたらとても嬉しいです。それではまた。今度お会いできた時には園芸部で一番綺麗なお花を持っていきますので楽しみにしていてください。尾崎渚。渚ちゃん、
Her dribbling tears poured down, leaving stains on the letter. But these tears were different from the ones from earlier. They were purely happy, truly grateful, and also deeply painful, heartrending, and sad that she wouldn't be able to convey those feelings.
ごめんなさい。ごめんなさい、渚ちゃん。私もずっとあなたに伝えたかった。伝えたかったのに。
きっと伝わっていたわよ。渚さんはあなたの大切な友達なんだから。
Thank you. I'll always be grateful to have you as a friend. Please forgive me. And thank you so much, Nagisa-chan. Nagisa's tender thoughts dispelled the darkness in Rena's heart, brightly illuminating it. It didn't mean she was forgiven. That didn't mean her sin was gone. However, she found out that someone she loved cared just as deeply about her all this time. And that alone made her tremendously happy and grateful. Rena held the letter against her chest, feeling the warmth of the tears.
大丈夫？竜宮さん。
Going by the face, Probably.
はい。
Rena wiped her puffy red eyes with a handkerchief over and over again, but she answered back with a nod. In all likelihood, the sorrow of this day would continue to eat at her heart for a while longer. Nevertheless, Tomoe believed that Reina Ryuugu would be able to move forward after these wounds healed.
罪を償うのはね、忘れないことよ。忘れるのが一番いけないんだと思う。だってそれを忘れてしまうと、あなたは自分の過ちがどれほどひどいことを引き起こしたのか反省する機会を失うから。
Self-reflection is indeed a very crucial life skill to have.
だから罪を忘れないでいなければ、その間違いを償うためにもいいことをしようって常に強く思うことができるはずよ。
Someone once said a person can only be kind to others after enduring a number of sorrows. Probably because only then can you truly sympathize with the feelings of sadness in another. So no matter how hard it may be, hold on to those memories. Don't forget, and by reflecting on them, you can cherish your precious happiness in the present and always make the effort to protect it.
そして忘れないためにはいつまでも精一杯、そしてあの子の分まで幸せになりなさい。
私にはそんな資格ありません。むしろ私なんか。
なるのよ。ならなきゃダメ。でなきゃ渚さんはあなたを不幸にするために生まれてきたことになる。
Well, you really know where to hit or where it will stick, don't you, Tomoe?
大切に思ってきた友達の生きてきた時間と思いをそんな風に無駄なものにしてもあなたは平気なの？竜宮さん、もしそれでも心が咎めるというのなら、あなたは他の友達のために、その幸せのためにもっともっと頑張りなさい。そしてもう二度と今日のような後悔をしないために、伝えるべきものはちゃんと伝えて、自分は一人じゃないって信じる勇気を持ちなさい。
それで償いができるんですか？
亡くなった人がどう思っても、その友達があなたを許すわ。自分のために頑張ってくれた優しいあなたを認めてくれるわ。そして私もあなたのことを許してあげられる気がする。
Tomoe gently held her hand out as she said that. Rena just stared at it for a while, unable to comprehend what it meant. But after a while, she placed her hand on top and grabbed it back.
ね。
はい。
She was still lost and confused, with sadness and guilt continuing to nag at her. Nevertheless, feeling swept up by Tomoe's words, a gentle smile finally reappeared on Reina's face. And at the same time, the heavy weight bearing down on her shoulders until now finally disappeared, and a radiant sensation spread all the way to her heart. Rena and Nagisa. These two close friends could never meet again. Thinking about that made Tomoe feel trapped by regret and self-loathing. But now, at least for the moment, she wanted to pray for Reina Ryuugu's happiness. Tomoe believed that until the very end, that's what Nagisa would have wanted for her best friend.
帰りましょう。立てる？
はい。あ。
Rena tried to get up, but it was too much for her legs to bear, so she immediately wavered and staggered. Don't hit your head on the way down. Tomoe tried to support her, but thanks to the momentum, they both stumbled and fell to the ground.
ごめんなさい、私。
ああ、いいの、気にしないで。
Rena suddenly looked down and noticed her knees. They must have scraped against the gravel or something when she fell because she was slightly bleeding.
怪我しちゃったみたいね。ちょっと待ってて、絆創膏を。
That moment, a pill packet spilled out from Tomoe's front pocket. Rena suddenly tilted her head when she saw it, but then she gasped and froze.
何？どうしたの、竜宮さん。
その薬、まさか。
Oh, the medicine. Yeah, I guess she would recognize it. Reina leaned forward and picked up the medicine pack that had fallen to the ground. Then, after flipping it over to confirm the color of the capsules, she opened her eyes even wider in shock.
やっぱり、これ、PC。どうして刑事さんがそれを？
知ってるの？この薬のこと。
この薬、私ちょっと前まで飲んでいました。それで。
どうしたの？竜宮さん。
これのせいで私、いつも急に自分がわからなくなって、あの時もこれを飲んで、それで。
あの時。
Those words made Tomoe suddenly catch her breath.
まさか、それって茨城の傷害事件で？
Reina's face turned completely pale, and she nodded. When Tomoe heard that, it felt like the desperate puzzle pieces inside her head were finally snapping together. Natsumi Kimiyoshi's sudden transformation. Reina Ryuugu's assault instinct in Ibaraki. Even though the incidents seemed completely unrelated aside from the fact that the two of them were from Hinamizawa, there was a solid verifiable connection between them. And the link binding them together was this medication that Reina just referred to as PC?
竜宮さん。
はい。
ちょっとこの後寄り道してもいいかしら。あなたの力が必要なの。お願い。
Well, we got our breakthrough on the drugs. The big one. The big one.
どうぞ。インスタントだけど。
あ、すみません。
Rena bowed her head while dropping a sugar cube and some cream into the coffee handed to her in a paper cup, then gently blew on it and took a sip. It was faintly ordinary, not particularly tasty. Still, it was comforting on her thirsty throat after undergoing several hours of testing and answering so many questions.
ごめんなさいね。いろいろと面倒をかけてしまって。疲れた？
ちょっとだけ。でも平気です。
捜査に協力してくれて本当にありがとう。あなたからの情報は今後の活動で大切に使わせていただきます。もちろん秘密は厳守の上で。
はい。よろしくお願いします。
Rena wrapped both her hands around the paper cup and savored the aromas as she bowed her head. It was a very innocent and obedient gesture. There was no trace of the cruelty that Tomoe had witnessed in her before. Reina knew about Natsumi's medication. Upon learning that, Tomoe decided to drive over to NRIP's headquarters and speak with Chief Suma, who she was on friendly terms with. And when she found him resting in the laboratory break room, she somewhat forcibly requested that he analyze this drug and provide a counseling session for Reina Ryuugu.
お前な、いくらなんでも非常識だぞ。こういうのは手続きを踏んで、こちらの都合を聞いてから。
Yeah, well, my convenience is for the good of the country.
無
Literally.
茶を言ってるのは重々承知しています。そこを曲げてなんとか。
She didn't even know if this could wait for another day. Plus, she couldn't call in a student like Reina very often. Additionally, there was a possibility that information could be leaked like before, leading to more evidence being destroyed. So she had to do everything she could to prevent a worst-case scenario from befalling the girl. Yeah, that's smart, given the circumstances. Given those considerations, a rapid response was far more important than some notion of pride or common sense.
お願いします、相馬さん。
たく、今度おごれよ。とんでもねえやつと関わっちまったもんで。
Yeah, well, this outrageousness will save us all, my good friend. Or at least the whole village. Yes, even though he bitched and moaned about it, Soma agreed to cooperate. Tomoe gave him a hearty thank you, and then bowed to Reina in the next room over.
レイナさん、いきなりで本当に申し訳ないと思ってる。でも、あなたの協力が必要なの。この薬の正体を私は何としてでも突き止めたい。もうこれ以上の被害者を出さないためにも。よろしくお願いします。
刑事さん。
Though Tomoe gave her a brief explanation of the situation in the car on the way there, Reina was confused by the rapidly developing situation and hesitated to reply for a moment. Still, she sympathized with Tomoe's appeal and realized that Nagisa believed in this detective, so she raised her head and nodded.
わかりました。何ができるかわかりませんが、お願いします。
ありがとう。
Then, someone entrusted specialized researchers to analyze the drug Tomoe provided to him, and immediately began counseling with Reina. She was interviewed on various topics and subjected to blood tests, EEG readings, and more. They had arrived at NRIPS before noon, but by the time they finished everything, the western sky was already dyed in red.
じゃあ、レイナさん、半年前、ひなみ沢のゴミ山にいたあなたを見ていたのが、私だとは全く気づいていなかったと？
はい。
Reina nodded. Reina gave a wholehearted nod. Her expression was stiff from the anxiety and tension, but her eyes were unwavering as she looked straight at Tomoe sitting in front of her, asserting her innocence.
確かに以前、工事現場の跡地で遊んでいる時に、通りがかった誰かが私を見ているって感じたことは何度かあります。だけど、それをはっきり見て、誰かなって確かめたことはほとんどないし、話もしなかった人の顔なんて、
まあ、それもそうよね。
Tomoe shrugged her shoulders and bitterly smiled while gulping down her coffee. She was able to recognize Reina Ryuugu at the garbage mountain because Ushi had spoken about her right before that, and said that he was interested in her. But as far as Reina was concerned, Tomoe was nothing more than a stranger. Just as you forget the faces of people you pass by on the road, it's hard to remember the faces of strangers you only see from a distance.
じゃあ、この人はあなたに1ヶ月ほど前に接触した刑事なんだけど。
Hanada, right?
すみません。覚えていません。
Well, I think we just got our confirmation, ladies and non-ladies. Hanada was bullshitting us.
だけど、こんな刑事さんに話しかけられたことは、多分、なかったと思います。
そう。
Tomoe took the photo back from Reina and let out a sign. I think you mean Sai? As she placed it back in her jacket pocket. As expected, that one fact was now confirmed.
この刑事はあなたに渚さんが死んだことを話したって私には言ってたのよ。でも実際はそうじゃなかった。
はい、渚ちゃんのこと本当に知りませんでした。私柿内に行ったのもこの前が初めてなんです。まして半年前電話ボックスで刑事さんを襲ったなんて絶対に違います。私じゃありません。
Was she lying to cover for it? Those doubts flashed through Tomoe's mind, and yet at the same time, when she recalled the feeling around her neck, a strange sense of discomfort began to rise up inside Tomoe's chest.
あれって本当に私首を絞められたの？
She thought back on how she felt while being strangled by Natsume, and noticed that it felt different. Just before she fainted, she didn't feel agony, but an acute, sharp pain. And that's right, an unusual itch, like something crawling out of her skin.
そういえば
Immediately after waking up at the Irie clinic, there were scratches on Tomoe's neck. It seemed reasonable to receive nail marks while being strangled, but scratches along the throat seemed a little odd. Plus, wasn't Reina Ryuugu standing outside the telephone booth in the first place?
あれちょっと待って。
Tomoe imagined the shape of the telephone booth and realized that there was something strange about the timing of her being caught by surprise. The door was hinged and had a full view of the outside through the glass. The area outside was illuminated, so if Reina was standing there, she shouldn't have been able to see her before she could open the door. And yet, she didn't notice that Reina was standing right in front of her until after the door was open? The facts weren't adding up, so deep in Tomoe's heart, she shook her head at the idea. Then, did she just dream that Reina was behind the door? Was it a hallucination? That's what I thought at the time. In theory, it didn't make a lot of sense. She didn't think she had the kind of mental illness that would make her confuse delusions and reality, and didn't even want to think about it. But it's true that Tomoe had been suffering from sleep deprivation and excessive fatigue from working hard every day, just as Dr. Irie had pointed out to her. So, she decided to call Ushi, and right after she did, she started feeling her mind loosen up. And then... She let out a big yawn. Her head was cloudy and her legs felt weak. Ushi would probably arrive in maybe 20 minutes after Tomoe called him. She leaned on the glass beside her and rested her cheek against it. It was cold and somehow felt good. Before long, it became difficult to keep her eyes open, and it felt like her cheek was being pulled upward as her field of view gradually shifted lower. She only noticed that she had slumped down to the ground after she was fully seated there. There was a mild pain in her elbow. She must have bumped it somewhere. Even so, her consciousness was sinking so far into the void that it didn't bother her at all. And then, she quietly lost consciousness.
そうか。
If events from a dream she had after falling asleep intermixed with reality, all the reasoning would work out. It was all a dream!
ただ、あの時。
Pretty anticlimactic. But I mean, hey? Makes sense. Just who was that strange girl that spoke to her right before she fainted? If it happened in a dream, it should have looked like someone she'd met before. But no matter how hard she thought about it, she couldn't remember seeing a girl like that. Many questions still remained, but at least with regards to Reina, Tomoe seemed to have reached some level of understanding. And when Monika's car exploded, she saw Reina at the scene. That too was probably a misconception on Tomoe's part. She may have seen a similar looking girl and projected her beliefs onto that visage.
わかった。信じるわ。あなたのこと。
At least she couldn't spot any lies in Reina's testimony, and she couldn't believe her crying in Nagisa's grave was mere acting.
ごめんなさい。いろいろと疑ったりして。おまけにいきなりカウンセリングを受けろだなんて頼んだりして、嫌な思いをさせてしまったこと、本当に申し訳ありません。
いえ、そんな。
Seeing a woman far older than her bowing so deeply to Reina caused her to be overwhelmed with awe. Even when you're in the wrong, it's very hard and takes a lot of courage to apologize to someone much younger than yourself. She completely understood that. Reina suddenly remembered her mother, who she had driven away from her memories. Why was it she gave up all her love for her and wanted to deny having her as a parent at all? She realized the reason. Guess she's a selfish bitch?
そうだ。あの人は私たちに謝らなかった。
Even until the very end, Reina's mother never apologized. Yeah, because she was a selfish bitch. Even after betraying Reina's father and cutting off her relationship with Reina, she didn't offer a single word of apology. Of course, the alimony payments they receive could logically be seen as a substitute for that. But what she truly wanted at that time was a proper apology to her and her father. If she had new and important things she wanted to do, moving on was inevitable. Her mother was a talented woman with her own values and her own life to live. Yeah, just too bad that in order to pursue that, she had to end up destroying her former husband and child's lives in the process. I mean, pursuing your own personal advancement should only go so far, especially when to which degree in which you pursue such a things could possibly impact those around you. You understand what I'm saying? Like, if there's something you really want to do with yourself, but it could end up hurting people who should by all means be the people closest to you in your whole life, I mean, you gotta ask yourself, should you really do that? Would it really be fair to those people to basically put your own happiness ahead of their own, and just possibly cause irreversible damage in the process to them? But I digress. But she should have at least offered an apology, even a single word, for making it impossible for things to go back to the way they were before. For lying. For betraying their trust. To understand how much she hurt us by trampling on the precious family time we've been living thus far, instead of simply running away from it. She's an adult, so even if the person she wronged was a child, she should sit up straight and accept it. Even if she tried to maintain social appearances while doing so, she could be forgiven. But instead, she chose to behave selfishly without showing a hint of kindness. More than anything else, that was the reason Reina couldn't forgive her mother.
でも、怒る資格は私にはない。
Bullshit! You have every right to be angry about that. After all, Rena ran away from her own problems in Ibaraki. She cast aside everything that used to be important to her and started a new life. Well, I mean, the circumstances in which you did that are a hell of a lot different than the circumstances in which your mother ended up leaving you and your dad. Very different. They're not really the same when you really think about it for a minute or two, Reina. Even though she knew doing so would cause pain, trouble and suffering for her old friends. But the detective standing in front of her acknowledged her mistakes and apologized, even believed in her. Though she was angry about it above all, she still regarded her like a dear friend.
自分もこうなりたい。
Earnestly fighting to protect her loved ones, and becoming the sort of person who won't betray others next time. Yes, deep in her heart, Reina steadfastly swore that to herself.
ありがとうございます、刑事さん。それから
何？
終わらせないでください。このまま他の誰かが私と同じ間違いを起こさないよう終わらせないでください。お願いします。
ええ、約束する。誓うわ、レイナさん。いえ、レナさん。
Reina referred to Reina using her common nickname Hinazawa. When she heard that, she was stunned for a moment, staring back at her with eyes opened wide. She wanted to throw away all the icky things and be reborn as a new person. That was the strong wish behind that name. At first, it seemed like an aggressive way of running from her old self. But now, it seemed like it suited Reina best.
竜宮レナ。素敵な名前だと思うわ。これからは私もそう呼ばせてもらいたい。構わないかしら。
はい。
Reina, or rather Reina, nodded her head and gave a bright smile.
来てよかった。
It came with a lot of sad thoughts, but this would be this would give her the courage to take the next step. Reina graved those thoughts into her heart as she wiped the tears from her eyes. Well, this has been quite the emotionally taxing episode, to say the least. But at least you could reasonably argue that Reina and Nagisa's shared character arc, so to speak, has ended on a bittersweet note. Still not happy about how, Nagisa ended up getting killed and all that. And I can understand why Tomoe had to hide the truth from her, right when they were visiting her grave. But at the very least, this would allow Reina to put herself on the path to gain some kind of closure from it all. And on top of that, she's now helped us get even more evidence about the tomfuckery going on behind the PC drug, as it's now called. And we certainly can be grateful to her for that, if nothing else. It'll help us bust all the right heads when we finally get to them. And speaking of heads that need to be busted, I am looking forward to busting Hanada's head when I come back in the next episode. At least I hope it'll allow me. At least I hope I'll be able to do that in the next episode. But yeah, Hanada, you're a goddamn traitor, and I'm coming for you. Prepare to die. So, with all that being said, I hope everybody who tuned into this latest episode has enjoyed said latest episode of the Higurashi When They Cry console arcs. If you did and you'd like to see more content from me, feel free to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel, and I will see you all next time. Take care.